The glass towers of Meridian Corporation pierced Seoul's skyline like crystal daggers, reflecting the grey autumn clouds that seemed to mirror Min Jun's perpetual mood. Inside the 42nd floor, CEO Park Min Jun sat behind his mahogany desk, his sharp jawline set in its usual expression of controlled indifference. At 32, he had built an empire through calculated decisions and emotional detachment, traits that served him well in business, but left his personal life barren. His assistant knocked softly. "Sir, the final candidate for the administrative position is here." Min Jun barely looked up from his tablet. "Send them in." The door opened to reveal a young woman whose presence immediately disrupted the sterile atmosphere of his office. Lee So-young stood in the doorway, her hand instinctively resting on her slightly rounded belly beneath her modest black blazer. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and despite her obvious nervousness, there was a quiet dignity in her posture that caught his attention. "Mr. Park," she said, bowing respectfully, "thank you for this opportunity." Min Jun's eyes briefly flickered to her condition before returning to her face. Most employers would have already dismissed her, but something about her steady gaze intrigued him. She wasn't begging or making excuses. She was simply present, waiting. "Please sit," he said, his voice maintaining its professional coolness. As So-young carefully lowered herself into the chair, Min Jun found himself studying her more intently than he had any candidate in months. There was a story written in the slight shadows under her eyes, in the way she held herself with both vulnerability and strength. "Tell me why you're here," he said simply. So-young's fingers tightened around the strap of her worn handbag as she met Min Jun's penetrating gaze. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, but sitting across from the most powerful CEO in Seoul, with her future hanging in the balance, words seemed inadequate. "I need this job, Mr. Park," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I know my situation isn't ideal for most employers, but I'm willing to work harder than anyone else you might hire." Min Jun leaned back in his leather chair, his expression unreadable. "Your resume shows a gap of 2 years. Care to explain?" The question hit like a physical blow, but So-young had expected it. "I was caring for my husband during his illness," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "He passed away 3 months ago." Something flickered in Min Jun's eyes, so brief that So-young almost missed it. He glanced at her medical records, noting the due date that was still months away. "And the father of your child?" "My late husband," she said simply, her hand moving protectively to her belly. "This baby is all I have left of him." The office fell silent, except for the distant hum of the city below. Min Jun found himself studying this woman who spoke of loss with such quiet dignity. In his world of corporate sharks and calculated moves, her honesty was disarming. "The position requires long hours," he said finally. "Are you prepared for that?" "I'm prepared for whatever it takes," So-young replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I have nowhere else to go." Her words hung in the air between them, raw and honest, in a way that made Min Jun's chest tighten unexpectedly. Min Jun's fingers drummed silently against his desk as he processed So-young's words. In his 15 years of business, he had never hired someone based on emotion, yet something about this woman's quiet desperation resonated with a part of himself he thought he had buried long ago. "Your previous experience is in hospitality management," he observed, flipping through her file. "This position requires financial analysis and project coordination. What makes you think you can handle it?" So-young straightened in her chair, and for the first time since entering his office, her voice carried a hint of strength. I managed a hotel's operations for 3 years before my husband became ill. I coordinated budgets, supervised staff, and handled crisis management daily. I may not have the exact technical skills, but I learn quickly, and I don't give up. Min Jun found himself oddly impressed by her response. Most candidates would have fumbled through technical jargon or made empty promises. She was being honest about her limitations while highlighting her strengths. "The salary is modest," he said, testing her further, "probably less than what you're hoping for." "Any salary is more than what I have now," So Young replied without hesitation. "I'm not looking for charity, Mr. Park. I'm looking for a chance to prove myself." Min Jun closed her file and stood, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the bustling city. He could see So Young's reflection in the glass, sitting perfectly still, waiting for his decision. There was something about her composure that reminded him of his own mother, the same quiet strength in the face of impossible circumstances. "When can you start?" he asked, turning back to face her. So Young's eyes widened in disbelief. You're giving me the job?" "Don't make me regret it," Min Jun said curtly, but there was something softer in his tone. The Meridian Corporation building felt even more imposing at 8 in the morning, its glass facade reflecting the early sunlight like a beacon of corporate power. So Young stood at the entrance, her hand resting on her growing belly as she took a deep breath. The modest maternity blouse she wore was her best attempt at professional attire, though she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong in this world of designer suits and confident strides. Min Jun's assistant, Ms. Kim, greeted her with a polite but distant smile. "Mr. Park is in meetings all morning," she explained, leading So Young through the maze of cubicles and glass offices. "He's asked me to get you settled and explain your duties." The workspace assigned to So Young was a small desk in the administrative pool, surrounded by younger employees who glanced at her with barely concealed curiosity. She could hear their whispered conversations, catching fragments about the pregnant woman and special treatment. "Your primary responsibilities include data entry, scheduling, and basic financial reporting," Ms. Kim explained, handing her a thick manual. "Mr. Park expects accuracy and efficiency. He doesn't tolerate mistakes." As the morning progressed, So Young threw herself into the work with determined focus. The computer system was more advanced than anything she had used before, but she methodically worked through each task, taking careful notes and double-checking every entry. Her back ached from sitting, and the baby's movements reminded her constantly of her condition, but she pushed through the discomfort. Around noon, she noticed a commotion near the elevators. Min Jun had arrived, his presence immediately commanding attention from everyone in the office. His eyes briefly met hers across the room, and she felt that same unsettling flutter she had experienced during the interview. By the end of her first week, So Young had established a quiet routine that kept her largely invisible to her colleagues. She arrived early, worked through lunch, and stayed late to ensure every task was completed perfectly. The whispers had died down, replaced by grudging respect for her work ethic, though she still felt the weight of curious glances whenever she moved through the office. Min Jun observed her from a distance, noting how she handled each assignment with meticulous care. He had expected her to struggle with the technical aspects of the job, but her reports were thorough and accurate. More importantly, she had solved a scheduling conflict that had been plaguing the department for weeks, proposing a solution that was both elegant and practical. On Friday afternoon, he found himself walking past her desk more frequently than necessary. So Young was focused intently on her computer screen, her brow furrowed in concentration as she worked through a complex spreadsheet. She had loosened her hair from its usual ponytail, and the soft waves framed her face in a way that made her look younger, more vulnerable. "Ms. Lee," he said, stopping beside her desk. She looked up, startled, and quickly moved to stand. "Mr. Park, I didn't see you." "Stay seated," he said, noting how she winced slightly as she shifted position. "I've reviewed your work this week. It's satisfactory." Coming from Min Jun, satisfactory was high praise, and So Young felt a flutter of relief. "Thank you, sir. I'm still learning the systems, but the Henderson project proposal," he interrupted. "I want you to review the financial projections and provide a summary by Monday." So Young's eyes widened. The Henderson project was one of the company's major initiatives, far above her pay grade. "Sir, I'm not sure I'm qualified. I'll determine what you're qualified for," Min Jun said curtly, though his tone lacked its usual edge. "Consider it a test." The office was nearly empty when So Young finally looked up from her computer, her eyes burning from staring at financial projections for hours. The Henderson project was more complex than anything she had tackled before, but she was determined to prove herself worthy of Min Jun's unexpected confidence. The baby had been restless all evening, and she pressed a hand to her side, trying to ease the discomfort. She didn't notice Min Jun approaching until his shadow fell across her desk. He stood there in his shirt sleeves, his tie loosened and his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it. "It's past 9, he observed, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been concern. "Why are you still here?" So Young looked up, surprised to see him. "I wanted to finish the Henderson analysis. I know it's important and I don't want to disappoint you." Min Jun studied her face, noting the exhaustion in her eyes and the way she unconsciously rubbed her lower back. "When did you last eat?" The question caught her off guard. I had lunch." "That was 8 hours ago." He frowned, and for a moment his carefully maintained professional facade slipped. "You're pregnant. You need to take better care of yourself." So Young felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I can manage my own health, Mr. Park." "I don't need—" "What you need," he interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind, "is to go home and rest. The analysis can wait until Monday." "But you said—" "I said Monday. That gives you the weekend." He paused, then added more quietly, "The company needs you healthy, Ms. Lee. The project isn't worth risking your well-being." Something in his tone made So Young look at him more carefully. For just a moment she saw past the cold CEO facade to something more human underneath. Monday morning brought an unusual sight to the Meridian Corporation offices. Min Jun personally delivering coffee and pastries to the administrative department. The gesture sent ripples of confusion through the staff, who were accustomed to their CEO's distant management style. But So Young noticed that he placed a cup of herbal tea and a selection of healthy snacks specifically at her workstation. "Caffeine isn't good for the baby," he said quietly when she looked up in surprise. "The tea is ginger. It should help with any morning sickness." So Young stared at the thoughtful gesture, her throat tightening with unexpected emotion. "Mr. Park, you didn't need to—" "The Henderson analysis," he said, cutting off her thanks with his usual businesslike tone. "Present it to me at 2 o'clock. As he walked away, So Young caught the curious glances of her colleagues. She couldn't blame them for wondering about the CEO's sudden attention to a temporary administrative assistant. She was wondering about it herself. The presentation went better than she had dared hope. Min Jun listened intently as she walked through her findings, occasionally asking sharp questions that tested her understanding of the data. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, studying the charts she had prepared. "Your recommendation?" he asked finally. "The project is financially sound, but the timeline is too aggressive," So Young said, her confidence growing. "If we extend the implementation phase by 3 months, we reduce risk significantly while only marginally impacting profitability." Min Jun nodded slowly. "I agree. Prepare a revised proposal incorporating your suggestions." As So Young gathered her materials, she felt a surge of pride unlike anything she had experienced in months. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt capable, valued, useful. "Ms. Lee," Minjun called as she reached the door. "Well done." The simple praise meant more to her than he could possibly know. The autumn rain drummed against the office windows as So Young worked late once again, this time by choice rather than necessity. The revised Henderson proposal was nearly complete, and she found herself genuinely excited about the project's potential. Her pregnancy was becoming more noticeable now, and she had to adjust her chair frequently to accommodate her changing body. But the work gave her a sense of purpose she had thought lost forever. Minjun appeared at her desk, carrying 2 cups of tea, setting one beside her computer without a word. The gesture had become routine over the past few weeks, though neither of them acknowledged it directly. "You should consider going home," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "The proposal doesn't need to be perfect." So Young looked up, surprised by his relaxed posture. Usually, their interactions were brief and professional. "I want it to be right," she said. "This is the first real project you've trusted me with." "Trust," Minjun repeated, as if testing the word. An interesting choice of words. Something in his tone made So Young study his face more carefully. "Have I done something wrong?" "No," he said quickly, then seemed to consider his words. "I don't trust easily, Ms. Lee. It's not a luxury I can afford in my position." "But you trusted me with Henderson." Minjun was quiet for a moment, his fingers wrapped around his teacup. "Perhaps I did. The question is why?" The admission hung between them, more personal than anything he had shared before. So Young felt the familiar flutter in her chest that his presence seemed to trigger, but this time it was accompanied by something deeper. A recognition of the loneliness that seemed to shadow him despite his success. "Maybe," she said softly, "it's because you recognize something in me that you understand." Their eyes met across the desk, and for a moment, the careful boundaries they had maintained seemed to blur. The company's annual charity gala was Meridian Corporation's most prestigious event, bringing together Seoul's business elite in a glittering display of wealth and influence. So Young had volunteered to help with the coordination, working behind the scenes to ensure every detail was perfect. She hadn't expected to attend as a guest, but Minjun had insisted that all staff members involved in the planning should be present. Standing in the hotel ballroom in her simple black maternity dress, the only formal wear she owned, So Young felt painfully out of place among the designer gowns and tailored suits. She stayed near the back of the room, checking her tablet to ensure the evening's schedule was running smoothly. "You look beautiful," a voice said behind her. So Young turned to find Minjun approaching, elegant in his black tuxedo. The compliment, so unexpected and sincere, made her cheeks warm. "Thank you," she managed. "The event seems to be going well." "Thanks to your planning," he said. "You've done excellent work." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the crowd of Seoul's most powerful people network and socialize. So Young noticed how Minjun maintained his polite smile while keeping everyone at arm's length, never allowing conversations to become too personal. "Do you ever get tired of it?" she asked quietly. "Of what?" "The performance. Always being on." Minjun glanced at her, surprised by her perceptiveness. "Every day," he admitted, "but it's necessary." "Is it?" So Young asked. "Or is it just easier than letting people see who you really are?" The question hit closer to home than Minjun was comfortable with. He studied So Young's face, noting the genuine curiosity in her eyes rather than judgment. "And who do you think I really am, Ms. Lee?" "Someone who brings tea to pregnant employees and worries about their health," she said softly. Someone who gives chances to people others wouldn't hire. The honesty in her voice made Minjun's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. The following Monday brought unexpected visitors to Meridian Corporation. So Young was organizing files when she heard raised voices from Minjun's office. Through the glass walls, she could see an older couple, the woman elegantly dressed, the man in an expensive suit, engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with her boss. "That's his parents," Ms. Kim whispered, appearing beside So Young's desk. "They only visit when there's trouble." So Young tried to focus on her work, but the tension radiating from Minjun's office was palpable. When the couple finally left, Minjun's face was a mask of controlled fury. He disappeared into the elevator without a word, leaving the entire floor in uncomfortable silence. Later that afternoon, So Young found herself alone in the break room when Minjun entered, looking more disheveled than she had ever seen him. His usually perfect hair was mussed, and there was a weariness in his eyes that spoke of old wounds. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. Minjun looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Why do you care?" The question wasn't hostile, just genuinely curious. So Young considered her answer carefully. "Because you've been kind to me when you didn't have to be," she said. "Because I recognize the look of someone carrying pain they don't want to share." Minjun leaned against the counter, his shoulders sagging slightly. "My parents want me to marry," he said finally. "A business arrangement, of course. They believe I've been alone long enough." "And you don't want to?" "I tried marriage once," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It ended badly. Very badly." So Young felt her heart clench at the pain in his voice. "I'm sorry. She left me for my business partner," Minjun continued, as if the words were being pulled from him against his will. "Took half my company and most of my ability to trust anyone." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. So Young understood now why he kept everyone at such a distance, why kindness seemed to surprise him. "Not everyone will hurt you," she said gently. Minjun met her eyes. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I won't," she said simply. The weeks that followed brought a subtle shift in the dynamic between Minjun and So Young. Their professional relationship remained unchanged, but there were moments, shared glances across the office, quiet conversations over late-night tea, small gestures of consideration that spoke of a growing connection neither was quite ready to acknowledge. So Young's pregnancy was advancing, and Minjun found himself increasingly protective of her well-being. He had quietly arranged for her to have a more comfortable chair and had instructed the facilities team to ensure the temperature in her area was always optimal. When she mentioned feeling dizzy one afternoon, he personally drove her to a doctor's appointment, waiting in the lobby with an anxiety that surprised him. "The baby is healthy," So Young reported when she emerged from the examination room. "Everything is progressing normally." Minjun felt a relief that was entirely disproportionate to his professional interest in an employee's health. "Good," he said simply, but his voice carried more emotion than he intended. During the drive back to the office, So Young found herself studying his profile as he navigated Seoul's traffic. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." Why did you really hire me? And please don't say it was because of my qualifications." Minjun was quiet for so long that So Young thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "You reminded me of someone," he said. "My mother, when I was young. She had the same strength, the same dignity in the face of impossible circumstances. What happened to her?" "She died when I was 15, Minjun said. "Cancer. She fought it for 3 years, never complained, never gave up hope. Even at the end, she was more worried about me than herself." So Young felt tears prick her eyes. "She sounds like an amazing woman." She was. "She would have liked you." The simple statement carried more weight than any declaration of affection could have. The call came at 2 in the morning, jolting Min Jun from a restless sleep. So Young's voice was strained with pain and fear as she explained that she was at the hospital. Early contractions, possible complications. She had no one else to call. Min Jun was dressed and in his car within minutes, his heart pounding with a fear he hadn't experienced since his mother's illness. The hospital corridors seemed endless as he searched for So Young's room, finally finding her in the maternity ward, looking small and vulnerable in the hospital bed. "I'm sorry for calling you," she said when she saw him, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know who else." "Don't apologize," Min Jun said, taking the chair beside her bed. "What did the doctors say?" "False alarm." So Young managed through her tears. "The baby is fine, but I was so scared. For a moment, I thought I might lose the only piece of my husband I have left." Min Jun reached out instinctively, covering her hand with his. "You're not going to lose the baby, and you're not alone." The words surprised them both with their intensity. So Young looked at their joined hands, then up at Min Jun's face, seeing an emotion there that made her breath catch. "Why are you here?" she whispered. Min Jun struggled with the answer, with feelings he had sworn never to experience again. "Because," he said finally, "somewhere along the way, you stopped being just an employee." The admission hung between them, changing everything. So Young felt her heart race, not from fear this time, but from the recognition of something she had been trying to deny for weeks. "Min Jun," she said softly, using his name for the first time. "I know," he said, understanding what she couldn't say. "I know it's complicated. I know the timing is impossible, but I can't pretend anymore that I don't care about you." In the quiet of the hospital room, with dawn breaking outside the windows, they finally acknowledged what had been growing between them. The morning sun streamed through the hospital windows as So Young was finally cleared to go home. Min Jun had stayed the entire night, dozing fitfully in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, refusing to leave despite her protests that he needed to rest. The sight of him sleeping, his usually perfect appearance rumpled and his face relaxed in a way she rarely saw, had made her heart ache with tenderness. "I can take a taxi," So Young said, as a nurse wheeled her to the hospital entrance. But Min Jun was already bringing his car around. "Absolutely not," he said, helping her into the passenger seat with a gentleness that made her feel precious, protected. "You're coming home with me." "Min Jun, I can't." "You can, and you will," he said firmly. "You shouldn't be alone right now, and my apartment has everything you need." The drive to his penthouse was quiet, both of them processing the emotional revelations of the night before. So Young stared out at the Seoul skyline, trying to reconcile the successful, distant CEO she had first met with the man who had held her hand through her fear and spoken of caring for her. Min Jun's apartment was as elegant and minimalist as she had expected, all clean lines and expensive furnishings. But he led her to a guest room that he had somehow managed to make comfortable and welcoming in the few hours since leaving the hospital. "Rest," he said, his voice gentle. "I'll be working from home today." As So Young settled into the luxurious bed, she felt safer than she had in months. Through the open door, she could hear Min Jun on a conference call, his voice carrying the familiar authority she knew from the office. But knowing he was there, watching over her, made all the difference. When she woke hours later, she found him sitting in a chair beside the bed, reading reports but glancing at her frequently. "How long have you been there?" she asked. "Not long," he lied, and her heart swelled with affection for this man who was learning to care again. 3 months later, So Young stood in the nursery of Min Jun's apartment, now decorated in soft pastels and filled with everything a baby could need. Her daughter, born healthy and perfect 2 weeks earlier, slept peacefully in the crib that Minjun had assembled himself, cursing creatively at the incomprehensible instructions while So Young laughed from her hospital bed via video call. "She's beautiful," Minjun said softly, appearing in the doorway with 2 cups of tea, their evening ritual that had evolved from the office to their shared home. "She has her father's eyes," So Young said, touching the baby's tiny hand. The grief for her late husband would always be part of her, but it had transformed into something gentler, a loving memory rather than a crushing weight. Minjun moved to stand beside her, his arm coming around her waist in a gesture that had become natural over the past months. And her mother's strength. They had married quietly a month before the baby's birth. A simple ceremony with just a few close friends. Minjun had insisted on adopting the baby, giving her his name and his protection. The transformation in him had been remarkable. The cold, distant CEO had become a devoted husband and father, as if So Young and the baby had unlocked a part of himself he thought was lost forever. "Do you ever regret it?" So Young asked, leaning into his warmth. "Taking a chance on a desperate pregnant woman?" Minjun pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Every day," he said, and when she looked up in alarm, he smiled, the real smile she had learned to treasure. "I regret that it took me so long to realize that the best decisions aren't always the logical ones." Outside their window, Seoul glittered in the evening light. But inside their home, they had found something more valuable than all the success and wealth in the world. A love that had grown from kindness, trust, and the courage to open their hearts again. The baby stirred in her sleep, and both parents moved instinctively to comfort her, their hands meeting over the crib in a gesture that spoke of partnership, love, and the beautiful future they were building together.